Well, the first thing is for anybody listening, like who is interested in starting a wellness program, whether it's like getting a line officer or somebody in supervisory position, the first thing to do is find the person that wants to do it. It's one of those things, and I know you probably heard this before, you can't assign somebody to do this kind of a job because it has to really truly come from somebody who wants to do it.
Yeah. Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast is for cops and for everybody interested in law enforcement culture, careers, and wellness. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as local detectives and patrolmen from my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain talk about their own experiences so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. Could it be that we are beginning to turn a corner in law enforcement wellness? If we are, at least part of the credit should go to agencies that have begun wellness programs in their departments. The people who run those programs are called wellness officers or wellness coordinators. My guest today, Wendy Hummel, is a retired police detective who came back to law enforcement to be the wellness coordinator at her local sheriff's office. We discuss what it takes to be the wellness officer and how to get started. Don't miss what Wendy says about picking someone to be that program coordinator and the importance in her experience of a good peer support program. Also, don't miss what Wendy says were the police skills that helped her start a wellness program in a new agency. Here's Wendy Hummel. Hello, Wendy. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Jared. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Good. I'm really interested in what you do, and I'd like to get kind of some background on you. So tell me about your law enforcement career.
Well, I started my law enforcement career in 1996, and I am originally from the East Coast. So I was born in New York, raised in New Jersey, and I entered into the Federal Law Enforcement Academy. It's called FLETC in Glencoe, Georgia. And I started my career as a special agent. And back then, the agency I worked for no longer exists. It's called INS, Immigration Naturalization Service. And it's now DHS, Department of Homeland Security. But during that time, I met my husband, and he was working in Wichita, Kansas. And so after a few years of a long distance relationship of being in New York City and him being here, I made the decision to leave and join the Wichita Police Department and move to Kansas.
Isn't that backwards? Aren't you supposed to go local to Fed?
Exactly. That's exactly. I usually say that.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
But in this case, I'll be honest, I had always wanted to be a street cop and really more so a detective. And I followed the federal path because it was a little bit more prestigious, a little bit more money, but I did it. But I'm so glad that I did what I followed my heart and went local because I never really had aspirations to go further than detective. And I'm so glad that I did. And I think I'm in the category of one of those people that always knew that this was the job that they wanted to do. I remember as a little girl, and this is going to date me. You're going to figure out how old I am when I say this, but I grew up watching shows like The Bionic Woman, and things like that, like Wonder Woman, like Linda Carter, Wonder Woman, I watched Charlie's Angels, like Farrah Fawcett. But in all seriousness, it was that, but it was also a little bit of, I think, what was going on in my own home and how I was raised. And in all seriousness, I can talk about it now, but I grew up in a home that, it was violent. There was drug abuse. There was criminal activity. And I just remember feeling that I had no control. I felt helpless as a young child. And I'm like, I have to be able to do something. And it was, I think that's kind of what drove me to want a career in law enforcement. And so I was able to fulfill my childhood dream. And so I was able to become a detective with the Wichita Police Department. And the majority of my career was working in persons crimes, which is all I wanted to do. Gang unit, homicide, sex crimes. And towards the end of my career, last couple of years, I ran the Crime Stoppers program. So I really loved every minute of it.
So what was it like coming to Wichita for the first time?
I was shocked. I'm not going to lie. It was a big culture shock because when I came here in 1997, almost 1998, I went from New York City to Wichita, and it's changed even since I've been here.
Sure.
And
from New York City, Wichita's got to feel tiny.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just a lot of other things too. Even just like I grew up being able to go to the beach and going to the mountains, and that was kind of an adjustment as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, seriously, my idea of Kansas was the Wizard of Oz. And I know people say that all the time as a joke, but that's really the only thing that I had to compare it to until I started to visit, of course.
Yeah.
So the intention was never to stay here permanently. My husband, who wasn't my husband at the time, and I had a plan that he'd keep his job because he had the Fed job.
Mm-hmm.
I would come join the police department, work here for a few years, and then we were planning to go back east. Mm-hmm. And that never happened. Ended up staying here, and both of us ended up retiring from our law enforcement jobs here.
Wow. Okay. But you retire, you were a detective, you retire from the PD, and then you weren't done with law enforcement. So what was your next chapter?
So backing up, I retired shortly after turning 50. And as you know, depending on your agency, once you have your 20 and you turn 50, those are like the magic numbers, at least with the police department, the Wichita Police Department, and you're eligible to retire and collect, your pension. Mm-hmm. I had never planned to retire at 50. I had always planned to stay 25 years with the police department. But, that's a story in and of itself about the reason I retired when I did. But when I did, I always knew that I was going to be doing something in the realm of supporting the people that do the work. Because I had really come to the realization a few years before retiring that, and some of it came from some personal struggles that I had, mm-hmm. and struggles that some of the people that I worked alongside with for so many years had been having. And I'm talking about physical, mental, and emotional issues. Yeah. It kind of dawned on me that we do so much to serve our community, and all of us it's such a selfless job, but we do such a bad job at taking care of ourselves personally and really organizationally. We don't, in the past, at least, we haven't really done much to promote that.
Yeah. You don't have to be in law enforcement very long before you see the unhealthiness of it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the culture. And quite honestly, being a female in law enforcement added a whole other layer that kind of compounded some of that, because, there's only 12 to 14% of women that are still in law enforcement. Yeah. It really hasn't changed since I started 25 years ago, which kind of floors me, quite honestly. But all of that to be said, that my focus really started to shift on my passion for serving the community and doing my job to having that same passion, but to want to serve my brothers and sisters. And so I knew that like I started doing some things with the police department. I teach yoga for first responders. I'm a certified yoga teacher. I got a grant, started trying to teach some resilience classes and just try to educate and, spread some information about some things. And even after I retired, I knew that's what I wanted to continue to do, because I knew that this was something that was important enough, even though it wasn't very well received, that we needed to jump on and do for our people and ourselves. So after retirement, I left, and the sheriff of the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office was a former supervisor of mine with the police department. And long story short, he had asked me to come work as a civilian. I was still commissioned, but really I didn't need to be, because a lot of my job was more of like a program manager. And the first year that I worked for the sheriff, I was in a position to serve community members with substance abuse and mental health issues. But I was also doing things within the agency for the people. I was teaching resilience. I was teaching the recruits yoga for first responders. And at some point, the sheriff had decided that he wanted to create a full-time wellness position to serve 100% serve the people at the agency. And so he created the position, had really had the care for his people and the willingness to try something new and different. And so he created this position about 3 years ago, and that's where I've been ever since.
How common is a wellness coordinator or wellness officer? How common is that in the last several years?
So when you say common for this area, I would say it's not common in our area, but like having done this work and really been involved in it for the past 7 years, you're really starting to see these things surface across the nation.
Okay.
So we still have a lot of work to do, but you're seeing it surface more and more. Like for instance, the KBI has a wellness coordinator. There's agencies in the Kansas City area that I know have wellness units, and some are creating positions. In the direct area that I work in the Wichita area, I'm the only one, and now we have a unit that I am aware of, but I feel like the trend is starting to grow, and people are starting to recognize the need for this to be a permanent position.
That's tough then, because this is the early days, the early years of wellness officers and wellness coordinators. And I can imagine that someone could be assigned to that position, they could be given that job, and they don't know what to start doing. Where do you, what do you tackle first? There's this giant mountain of unwellness among police officers. Where do you even start? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah. Oh, well, I can tell you what I did, but I don't know if it's the right way. But that's right. So, the first thing is, for anybody listening, like who is interested in starting a wellness program, whether it's getting a line officer or somebody in supervisory position, the first thing to do is find the person that wants to do it. It's one of those things, and I know you probably heard this before. You can't assign somebody to do this kind of a job, because it has to really truly come from somebody who wants to do it.
Yeah.
And really from someone who gets it and has done some of these things themselves. So that's the first thing. But here's what I'll tell you. All of my experience as a detective, researching and interviewing and solving cases is what came in handy. Like that, because that's all I did. I didn't try to recreate the wheel. Is for years, even before being in the position officially, I'd been doing this on my own, reaching out to agencies who were doing these things. The first agency I ever reached out to years ago was the Indianapolis Police Department. I saw that they received an award for their wellness program. And so I contacted the captain at the time who was in charge of that unit. And then just, kept reading articles. I reached out to people. And then once I was in the position, I attended an officer of safety and wellness symposium. I applied for a grant through the COPS office, the Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act, was able to get money to support what we were doing to help fund our peer support and resilience initiative. I also took advantage of another federal resource. There's so many resources out there that I think people just aren't aware of. And I was able to be assigned to subject matter experts across the nation. Okay. So the Nashville Police Department, I was assigned to their wellness unit, and then Sherry Martin, who's the National FOP Wellness Coordinator, she was another subject matter expert. So for a year, we talked every 2 weeks, and they helped guide and shape and inform the future of what we did, plus input from the agency and deciding on what the priority was. We tackled, after all of that, to get to your original question, we thought the very first thing, based off of research and based off of need, is creating a robust peer support team. And the reason we did that was because one of the things that the sheriff noticed was that people were really struggling. There's been a lot of line of duty deaths at this agency. More so, for an agency of this size, we've had, now 10 in the life of the agency. And then have happened we've had 3 in the last 12 years.
Ballpark, how big is Sedgwick County?
So the agency itself, we have 186 sworn. There's 500 members because it also encompasses the jail. And that's if we're at full capacity staffing.
Right. Which nobody is nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which actually lends itself to wellness and how that can help, because it's something that can improve morale and retention as well. But But so he saw the need, he saw that people were struggling and really decided that he wanted to do something about it, which is why he created the position. But peer support, a lot of people still don't want to reach out and get mental health support within this profession. But research shows the thing that people have always done and will continue to do more than anything else is talk to their peers. Mm-hmm. So we created a robust peer support team. We've always had here a CISM team, which is responding after critical incidents, but peer support is a little bit more proactive and preventative. It includes education and
define
things like
define
that.
CISM.
Critical incident stress management. Mm-hmm. So what that means within the world of law enforcement and first responders is that there's an incident that's classified as a critical incident. So an officer-involved shooting, maybe a particularly bad fatality accident, and you would get your team together and anybody who was involved in that particular case, like if they responded on scene, maybe they worked the scene, they would attend, and that would include dispatchers, fire, EMS, mm-hmm. and police. And having a peer-led discussion about just how people are thinking, what they're feeling, and reactions. And the purpose is for people to share in an environment. First of all, it's not intended to be like an operational debrief. Like this is
right.
what you should have done. This is what you shouldn't have done. It's really to help those people process what they might be struggling with. Research has shown that talking about these things can help to offset some future issues that may arise. It doesn't guarantee anything. It's not therapy, but it's a way for people to share their experiences and come together so they know that they're not alone mm-hmm. and recognize what they have in common. So that's very, very, very impactful and powerful and necessary. But peer support is more than that. It's more of the upfront before things so that, one example that I'll give you is like if you're educating and you're teaching and you're training on some of this stuff, when things do go bad, you're kind of already exposed and experienced what peer support or even like seeing a therapist might be like, so that you can access these things when you need them. So right. it's just expanding the concept and really focusing on that before part so that maybe somebody doesn't get to the point where it becomes an issue or a disciplinary issue or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I struggle with chaplains is that too often chaplains hang back and become strangers to the department they serve because they don't get involved. They don't get to know people. And you just can't expect a cop, at least not the average cop, to open up to a stranger. When they've had something really traumatic, to expect them to go and open up to a stranger is a big ask. And chaplains are more effective when they get in and know people and build relationships in advance of something critical happening. And same thing with peer support. Peer support needs to be familiar and just a routine part of a cop's life before something bad happens so that then they can open up and get good help and be heard and be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that's why we decided, the sheriff was like, well, let's really start with, this peer support concept. So that's what we did. And, in addition, the beginning stages also were, partnering with our EAP because I know they get a bad rap, but ours is really good. We have a brick and mortar, in our town. Really, we have a few really great culturally competent clinicians that train with our team. And, and then just teaching the recruits and then rolling information out. We also have the Cortico app, which is a mental health wellness, holistic wellness app. So that's like what we did early on. And things really started to gain momentum because one of the most important things that I learned, I was told this, but I learned it and saw it happen, is that getting the right people on the team from the agency, because the one thing that I had going against me coming into this position was, although I am a retired detective, from an agency just right across the street, I didn't start my career at the sheriff's office.
Right.
So not everyone knows me the way that they might know somebody from within. And so I had to really seek out people who were leaders and cheerleaders for the cause. And so that really helped. After about a year and a half of really getting our peer support team up and running, people started to see that the people that were bought in were people they respected. And it really just started to go from there. I'm not going to say that everyone's bought in, but I can tell you more people are bought in and understand than there were when we started.
Right. No, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You're not ever going to get 100% buy-in at the same time across the board. It just won't happen. You're only going to have a certain percentage of people who have the built-in support, like from their family or church or something, that they could, weather storms without help. Because they've got the help from outside. And so if you can raise the number above that baseline and start including people who maybe don't have great support at home or didn't have a great childhood or they don't have some great religious community surrounding them, if they don't have those resources, can we raise the number and capture some of those people and help them? To me, that's victory.
Yes, absolutely. And you made me think of something. So what you're describing, I heard this not that long ago, because for the longest time, I'll be honest, it can get a little discouraging that you're trying to promote a program, and it can get, like, when people aren't bought in, it can get a little discouraging. But it seemed like something shifted like a year ago, and there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point, and it's about like how he talks about like you only need 8 to 10% of the population to buy into a concept or an idea before it becomes mainstream. And I feel like that's kind of what's happened within here in the agency, but even nationally. Like, people are bought in, they get the importance of this, and it feel like things have shifted, and we have more people, I think, than we don't that are bought in.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging.
We had a critical incident in Kansas City here not too long ago, and a sergeant called me and said, "Hey, we're going to have everybody involved at the police station tonight. Can you be here?" And so I got my car and drove over there, and I got there early, and I'm just kind of hanging out. One shift is finishing up, the second shift's coming in. The people who were actually not working because they were involved, they were starting to kind of filter in. And I wasn't sure with this group. I wasn't sure if anyone would want to talk. I didn't know if they'd all still have their guard up. They all walked in chatting and talking and telling embarrassing stories about themselves and talking about the incident itself. And there's just all this dialogue. I'm just watching. I'm just standing off to the side watching. And I was so pleasantly surprised at how readily they talked to one another, and both officers and supervisors just, encouraging one another and sharing the little mistakes they made in the heat of the moment that, well, that was embarrassing. I meant to jump forward and I jumped backward, that kind of thing. And I was so impressed. And I maybe there's always been some of that, but I know I went into it expecting them to not communicate well. And I was really pleased with how well our officers talked after a critical incident.
Yeah, that has been my experience. That it's not. I don't think I've ever had to do anything like that so far, where people weren't open and willing to talk.
You didn't have to pull teeth. Yeah.
Yeah, not really. And I was surprised in the beginning because I expected that.
Yes.
But I think we're getting better at training people in how to do this work, whether you're a chaplain, peer support, or just whoever works in the culture. Mm-hmm. But I also think we're priming people, and we're talking about this more, and it's becoming more acceptable and part of the culture. So it's easier for people and to feel more comfortable doing it, because I know you've probably heard this term before, but all we did was suck it up before. That's how I came up. Yeah. And I didn't ever talk about this stuff unless it was maybe at home with my husband, but I didn't really talk about it to the people I worked with at all.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we are turning a corner, and it is improving. And I think more agencies are going to be hiring a wellness coordinator. They're going to be selecting an officer to serve as a wellness officer. So let me pick your brain. If you were on the hiring committee, who would you want ideally as a wellness officer? Who would you pick? What kind of things would you look for? Who's the right person for that job?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first of all, what I'll say is I've learned this, is that it's not a one size fits all. Depending on the culture of the agency, the size of the agency, the needs of the agency, that's one of the first things that I would need to know. But in general, you've got different models. You have the model of the wellness coordinator, or whatever you're going to call the position, comes from within. It's somebody from within the agency. But then there's other agencies that have either a hybrid model or they completely bring someone in from the outside. So that's the first thing is like, you've got 3 potential ways to do this.
Yeah.
You have somebody like in my case, I came from the outside. I am now a civilian. I'm a retired cop. So that kind of makes me, I think, more of a hybrid, right? So there's that hybrid approach. And then again, bring somebody completely in from the outside or from within. So I think there's a lot to be said about trust and relationship building. So that has to be accounted for, whoever the person is. So that's the first thing, because as we all know, first responders are really good at detecting BS. So you have to have somebody that, they're going to come in and they're not going to know everything, and they're definitely going to fail because not everything is going to work.
Right.
And just to be okay with that, and just someone who has the ability to do a little bit of research, because it is definitely something that requires being able to research and be discriminate and be able to like integrate and pick and choose what's going to work.
Well,
and
you don't
also
want someone to come in and reinvent the wheel. There are good agencies doing good work. They need to be able to acquire that information and figure out what applies to their agency.
Exactly. And that's actually, I'm so glad you said that, because that's nothing that I have done. And with this particular position or now our unit is anything that's new. I mean, all I did was look at what other people were doing and see what fit best here. And in fact, like the model that we came up with, our infographic for our, holistic perspective for our agency, it all came from doing research on what other people were doing or what was best practice. So that's right. Just being able to recognize, what's going to work for the agency and the ability to connect and reach out and see what people want.
What should a wellness officer do when they float an idea out there, they try to start a new program and it fails?
Well, so the first thing I want to say is, the word wellness in and of itself can mean a lot of different things to different people. So I suggest that if you're going to start a wellness unit or have a wellness officer or whatever you're going to call them, you need to know what it is you want from that position. Because first of all, do you want a wellness coordinator to be somebody that strictly comes in and does fitness and nutrition right off the bat? Do you want them to implement a full-scale program? Do you want them to do peer support? Do you want them to do, what is it that you want the position to do? Because that's going to dictate what that person's background is.
Right.
So that's kind of one of the first things. So that's a very broad term. But I think you need to expect to fail a little bit, but don't dwell on that. So, think big, act small, fail fast, and learn always.
Yeah.
That's one of the things one of my mentors tells me, and I remember that because sometimes, you're not going to always succeed. So
that's right.
Just expect it and move on.
That's excellent. Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing in this space, and you also have a podcast that you do. Tell me about that podcast.
Yeah, it's called Guns and Yoga. So as everybody knows by now, I'm a retired cop, but I'm also a yoga instructor. And really that was my entryway into the wellness world, is that's really what helped me overcome some things. So, but I love teaching yoga. I love practicing it. I love it, how it, it really helps to teach so many different principles. And there's a lot of crossover into what you do in yoga, believe it or not, in this job. So because that's such a big part of me, that's the name of the podcast, Guns and Yoga.
That's awesome.
And yeah, my husband thought of it. He's a Guns N' Roses fan. Go figure.
I looked at the cover art and saw resemblance. And so absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Did you see that? Yeah. So, and it's all about first responder wellness, which is really, my passion. It's in everything I do, whether it be my full-time job or outside of that. But yeah, so it's just kind of probably very similar to what you do, is just talk to people who are either first responders or are running programs to support first responders, family members, all of the above.
That's awesome. Well, hey, Wendy, thank you again for what you do. And thanks for talking to me today about Wellness Coordinator.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was great. I appreciate the work you're doing as well.
The officers or civilian coordinators who run a department wellness program have a huge task that can feel a bit impossible at times. So let me give you a bit of encouragement. First, like Wendy said, work hard to make the program well defined. You can't solve everything, so pick a few targets and focus your work in those areas. Second, you can't personally save every officer. Some people are just going to self-destruct no matter what you do. But you can help some people. Remember the story of the boy saving starfish. There's a boy who stood on a beach where hundreds of starfish had been swept up by the waves and stranded there to die, and he's throwing the starfish back in the water one by one so that they can survive. A grown-up watches him for a minute from the boardwalk and then yells down to him, "You can't possibly throw all those starfish back in the water. You could stand there all day throwing starfish. It won't matter." The boy looks around, throws another starfish into the water, and says, "It mattered to this one." What you do matters, so keep up the good work. Thank you to Rob Sanderson from episode 28 for directing me towards Wendy and her podcast, Guns and Yoga. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
Because we don't have the answers and we don't know why this happened, the facts are that I have to live with the fact that I took a human life. Yeah. It doesn't matter that it was a, quote, justified shooting, because it was. We were cleared by internal investigation. We were cleared quickly by the district attorney's office. I mean, even years later, we were cleared in a federal lawsuit. But the fact is that I, as a person, as a Christian, I have to live with the fact that I took this young man's life.
Yeah.
And that it affected me then, and it still affects me to this day.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.